Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 19th of June, I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 481 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition, and then I will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The UN has accused Moscow of continuing to block humanitarian aid deliveries to Russian-occupied areas in eastern Ukraine that have been affected by the recent Kakhovka Dam rupture. Aid cannot be denied to people who need it, the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, said in a statement. Russia had the means, motive and opportunity to bring down the dam, according to exclusive drone photos and information obtained by the Associated Press newswire. Images taken from above the dam appeared to show an explosive-laden car atop the structure, and two officials said Russian troops were stationed in a crucial area inside the dam where the Ukrainians say the explosion that destroyed it was centred. The death toll from the flooding caused by the destruction of the dam has risen to 16 in Ukraine, with 31 still missing and 29 in territories controlled by Russia, according to briefings by Kyiv and Moscow. The regional authority in Ukraine-controlled Kherson reports that both the city of Kherson and 4 other settlements remain submerged on the right bank of the Dnipro, and almost 850 houses are still underwater. Ukraine has recaptured the village of Piatychatki in the southern Zaporizhia region, the Deputy Defence Minister, Hanna Maliar, has confirmed. It would be the second gain in the area since Kyiv launched its counter-offensive earlier this month. The UK Ministry of Defence has said that the Russian military has highly likely started relocating troops from the eastern bank of the Dnipro River to Bakhmut and to Zaporizhia. Vladislav Gladkov, the governor of the Belgorod region in Russia, has reported that minor damage was sustained in the village of Balki after cross-border shelling from Ukraine. Russia's FSB security service said earlier today it had thwarted a series of Ukrainian sabotage and terrorist plots targeting Russian-installed officials in Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, met the Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier today. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has said that all of the Patriot air and missile defence systems provided by the US to Ukraine in April are still working, contrary to claims by Russia. President Zelensky also praised Ukrainian forces for their very effective repelling of enemy assaults near the Avdiivka, where Ukrainian forces have advanced about 1 kilometre around the town over the past 2 weeks. The EU is speeding up arms deliveries to Ukraine to support the counter-offensive against Russian forces, the EU industry chief Thierry Breton told the French daily Le Parisien. Ukrainian forces have destroyed an ammunition depot near the Russian-occupied port city of Henechsk in the southern region of Kherson. And the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, sought to present an African peace mission to Moscow and Kyiv in a positive light, tweeting, "Africa Peace Initiative has been impactful, and its ultimate success will be measured on the objective, which is stopping the war." An independent Scotland would have a constitution based on the sovereignty of the people and reflect Scotland's values as a modern democratic European nation from day one, according to plans outlined by the First Minister, Humza Yousaf. The fourth paper in the Building a New Scotland series sets out how a written constitution, developed by the people in Scotland, could put rights and equality at its heart, including protecting the right to strike and giving constitutional recognition to Scotland's NHS. Broadcasting Scotland was at the press conference to launch the paper this morning, and we have the First Minister's full statement for you now.
Every democracy, of course, quite rightly, has its battle of ideas. That's healthy. But what characterises the success of many of the countries we have looked at is that over and above the essential cut and thrust of daily democratic engagement, there is often a general consensus on what kind of nation they are, or indeed what kind of nation they aspire to be. I believe in Scotland we have a similar general consensus, a belief in equality, a belief in opportunity, a belief in community, and that we are entitled to certain basic rights. Rights such as the right of workers to take industrial action, the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to access a system of healthcare free at the point of need. That consensus building defines my political beliefs. The idea of solidarity and guaranteed rights for diverse groups of individuals is of the utmost importance to me. So the paper that we are publishing today, that I am delighted to be publishing today, about creating a modern constitution for an independent Scotland, is about that kind of Scotland that we want to see, and ultimately the kind of Scotland that we want to be. It's about the issues that matter the most, not least protecting the NHS in a written constitution. And crucially, it's about people who live here, whoever they are and wherever they come from. They can help to shape that newly independent country. We will debate our proposals in the Scottish Parliament. We will, of course, engage with the public, with trade unions, with businesses, and many others who make up Scottish civic society. Today's paper is about how we can build a better Scotland for everyone. So we hope that it will encourage and indeed inform that wide-ranging debate. The vision that we are outlining in today's paper, it contrasts quite starkly with a Westminster government which is taking Scotland in a very different approach, a different direction. One where, I'm afraid, rights are not protected, one where rights are being systematically eroded. The UK does not have a codified constitution, as we know. Instead, its constitutional arrangements are based on the principle that the Westminster Parliament is sovereign. This makes it a global outlier amongst modern democracies. For example, all member states of the European Union have written constitutions. Not having one and relying on Westminster supremacy has real consequences. We've spent the last decade looking on as the UK government undermines constitutional principle after constitutional principle, with very little that anyone can do about challenging them or holding them to account. That would not be possible in a country with a codified written constitution that sets what the rules are, but then importantly and crucially sets out what people can do to ensure that governments and politicians adhere to them. Westminster has already been able to undermine the devolution settlement, override decisions made by an elected Scottish Parliament. In future, Westminster sovereignty, of course, could even allow the UK Parliament to repeal devolution through nothing other than a simple majority vote. That's not an abstract concept. It's worth remembering that the UK government is already seriously considering the repeal of the Human Rights Act, one of the most significant achievements of any UK Parliament in the last 30 years. So all of this raises the question, why should Scotland settle for the current Westminster system rather than making different choices ourselves? With independence, Scotland could embrace the principle outlined in the Claim of Right for Scotland, that sovereignty lies with the people. And we could adopt a written constitution that sets out to protect key rights, key values. Governments, of course, come and go. But what a constitution built by the people can do is set out and embody a set of longer-term, more fundamental values about what a country is for, how it should work, a common understanding of a nation's priorities, a standard below which no government should ever fall, and a mechanism for ensuring that these aren't just lofty words, but are meaningful rights that put power in the hands of the people who live here. Today's paper also sets out how we would create a constitution. It makes clear that after a vote for independence, the devolved Scottish Parliament would legislate on an interim constitution. After a wide process of consultation and of engagement, this interim constitution would come into force at the time of independence. Following independence, we would then develop a permanent constitution through a legally mandated constitutional convention. This process would be driven by the people. Once a draft constitution has been drawn up, it will then be considered by the Scottish Parliament. But it will only come into force if the people of Scotland vote for it in a referendum. In the context of the Westminster system, these proposals do sound radical. We are, after all, planning to involve the entire country in discussions about fundamental constitutional change. But when you look beyond Westminster, you can see that our proposals are in line with steps that have been taken by nations right across the world. In the last 20 years, several countries have directly involved their citizens in designing or indeed amending their constitutions. The countries which have amended their constitutions include Ireland, include the Netherlands, as just two examples. And Scotland would seek to learn from international examples. After all, a new constitution will protect and enhance the rights of every person in Scotland. It should be designed, it should be considered, and it should be approved by as many people in Scotland as is possible. Because of that, this paper cannot definitively say what will be in the permanent written constitution of an independent Scotland. That's a decision that can only be taken after independence by the people of Scotland. But today's paper gives some ideas of the provisions that a constitution could include. Like similar documents in nations around the world, we expect it would set out fundamental values such as democracy, the sovereignty of the people, freedom, and the rule of law. It would include provisions to enhance equality, prevent discrimination. It would describe the role of some of our key institutions, such as Parliament, the government, the courts. It would also contain measures on other issues which people see as being of fundamental significance and importance. It could, for example, specifically protect the right to take industrial action, or recognise the rights and interests of our island communities, or contain provisions on the right to adequate housing, the right of communities to own land, or our right as citizens to access healthcare which is free at the point of need. In the Scottish Government's view, it should also include provisions stating very clearly and explicitly that Scotland will not host nuclear weapons. And many constitutions include environmental provisions. We propose that Scotland could protect the right to a healthy environment, could include sections on sustainable development, tackling the climate crisis, protecting nature. As those examples help to demonstrate, the very process of creating a constitution would be energising. It's a document that will be created by the people as well as for the people. It will help us think about and describe the sort of country we want Scotland to be. And by helping to enhance and protect important rights, it will make a genuine and significant difference to people's lives. Of course, a written constitution is something that will only come about when Scotland is independent, when people who live in Scotland are taking the key decisions about Scotland's future. We have made so much progress as a country over these past 24 years with a limited measure of self-government. As a country, we are now facing a choice of two futures. One that is driven by Westminster, which is taking advantage of a Brexit Scotland didn't vote for, to erode our rights and undermine our national parliament. The alternative is for people in Scotland to take our country's future into our own hands, to embed rights we should all enjoy in a modern constitution and build the better Scotland we know is possible. Thank you, and I'm more than happy to take questions.
That was the First Minister there launching the latest paper on a written constitution for an independent Scotland earlier today. Downing Street has signalled that Rishi Sunak is to miss a vote on whether to impose sanctions on Boris Johnson over his Partygate denials because of other diary plans. In a sign, Number 10 wants to defuse the blue-on-blue row over the former Prime Minister's conduct as quickly as possible. Sunak's spokesperson said he was not planning to attend Parliament this evening due to commitments that he can't move. The duties were said to include welcoming the Prime Minister of Sweden to Downing Street and a series of other meetings. This evening's vote will be the culmination of a 14-month inquiry by a cross-party group of MPs into Johnson's Partygate denials, and which found he committed 5 contempts of Parliament. As well as deliberately misleading the Commons, Johnson misled the Privileges Committee behind the investigation, the inquiry concluded. He was also found to have partially leaked its findings, been complicit in a campaign of abuse against its members, and undermined Parliament's democratic processes. MPs will have up to 5.5 hours to debate the report from 4:30 this afternoon. Common sources suggested it was likely to take 4 hours based on the number of MPs who wanted to speak. At the end, a vote will be held on endorsing the findings, which recommend that Johnson should be blocked from getting a pass for former MPs, which would otherwise allow him privileged access to Parliament. The sanction was proposed by the Privileges Committee because it was not able to enforce the 90-day suspension it was going to recommend, as Johnson had already quit as an MP last week. Number 10 would not say definitively whether Sunak would abstain on the vote, given it may go through uncontested, meaning there will not be a formal division and instead the report will go through on the nod. Johnson's supporters were said over the weekend to be planning to abstain on the vote as well. The move was viewed as a sign of Johnson's weak grip over the parliamentary party he once commanded, signalling his allies' fear of demonstrating how few in number they were. Though Downing Street and Johnson have sought to avoid holding a formal division whereby MPs must register their vote in the aye or no lobby, there were increasing signs that Labour would push for one. If the debate concludes while we are on air, we will of course let you know the outcome. Sir Keir Starmer was in Edinburgh today to announce the Labour Party's green energy strategy, which would include the founding of the Great British Energy Company in Scotland to exploit renewable energy to reduce the UK's dependency on fossil fuels and to lower the cost of energy to homes in the UK. Labour launched its energy strategy in Edinburgh in a bid to overshadow the SNP and in an attempt to win back Scottish voters. Starmer tried to reassure his audience that jobs in the North Sea oil and gas fields would not be at risk under Labour. Mr Starmer has vowed to halt the licensing of new oil and gas fields, but he denied that Labour would rescind licences issued by the Tories, or halt production from existing fields. This means that the controversial Rosebank field in the North Sea, for which final permission is believed to be imminent, could still go ahead under Labour's plans. Union leaders sharply criticised Starmer this month for his plans to halt North Sea licensing, calling the proposals naive, and saying that they threatened current and future jobs. Starmer, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, and Anna Sarwar were at pains throughout the policy launch today to repeat that North Sea oil and gas would be needed for decades to come. The UN's labour standards body has told the UK government it must make changes to highly controversial new strike laws, which critics say threaten the fundamental rights of UK workers. The International Labour Organization, the ILO, a UN agency, said that the UK needed to ensure that existing and prospective legislation is in conformity with international rules and freedom of association, and added that the government must seek technical assistance from the agency's experts. The ILO also concluded the government should allow unions to electronically ballot workers rather than relying on strictly controlled postal votes. It should also improve consultation with unions and limit government powers to ensure that they do not interfere with the autonomy and functioning of workers' and employers' organisations. The Trade Union Congress described the ILO's conclusions delivered last week by a Committee on Labour Standards as a hugely embarrassing reprimand for the UK government. The TUC lodged a complaint against the UK government in September last year. The complaint alleged that ministers had taken steps to attack the right to strike, which has been protected by an ILO convention since 1948. The TUC said it was the first time the UK had been told to seek technical assistance since 1995 under John Major's Conservative government. The conclusions were delivered by a committee that has also considered alleged issues in authoritarian regimes such as El Salvador, Gabon, and Turkmenistan. The committee's conclusions represent a blow to the UK government, which had repeatedly denied accusations of making deliberate attacks on the right to strike, and had even argued that the ILO backed its new rules. Rishi Sunak has ruled out extra help for UK homeowners struggling to pay soaring mortgage costs as the average two-year fixed-rate loan rose above 6%. The Prime Minister said the government should stick to the plan to halve inflation in its attempts to tackle the cost of living crisis, despite growing pressure on households across the country facing a surge in borrowing costs. Mortgages have soared in recent weeks as the Bank of England's attempts to cut stubbornly high inflation have fed through into lending deals. City investors widely expect the central bank to announce its 13th consecutive rate increase on Thursday this week in response to the persistently high inflation. The SNP's social justice spokesperson, David Linden MP, said the damaging policies of the Tories and pro-Brexit Labour Party are wrecking the economy and hammering millions of homeowners and first-time buyers, and he challenged the UK government to do more to prevent people losing their homes as a result of Westminster's failure. Commenting, David Linden said, "Many will find these soaring mortgages completely unaffordable, and there is a very real danger people could lose their homes or fall into serious debt as a consequence of these damaging Westminster policies. The UK government must take urgent action to protect people at risk of losing their homes and to bring inflation and mortgage rates back down to manageable levels. But independence in Europe is the only credible way for Scotland to secure sustained economic growth and to reverse the damage being caused by Brexit." He went on, "The SNP is the only party offering real change with independence, which is essential to securing prosperity in Scotland." A Florida judge handed prosecutors in Donald Trump's classified documents lawsuit a significant victory today by ruling the former president cannot publicly disclose any of the evidence against him. Trump, who was arraigned in Miami last week on a 37-count indictment over his improper storage and handling of classified materials at his Mar-a-Lago resort, can also only view, but not retain, any of the evidence under the direct supervision of his lawyers, the order from the magistrate judge, Bruce Reinhart, stated. This secrecy ruling in particular will thwart Trump, who has been a vocal critic of Justice Department prosecutors and Special Counsel Jack Smith on his Truth Social website, from attempting to publicize or spin any of the evidence to his advantage, as he continues to insist that the case against him is a politically motivated witch hunt. Discovery materials, along with any information derived therefrom, shall not be disclosed to the public or the news media or disseminated on any news or social media platform without prior notice to and consent of the United States or approval of the court, Reinhart's order filed on Monday in the Southern Judicial District of Florida stated. Trump, Reinhart said, shall not retain copies and may only review case materials under the direct supervision of defense counsel or a member of defense counsel staff. The non-dissemination clause applies equally to Trump and to his team of lawyers. The defense is currently being led by the New York attorney Todd Blanche, a former federal prosecutor, following Trump's apparent inability to recruit a specialist national security lawyer with the necessary security clearances to help him navigate the Espionage Act charges. Prosecutors filed a motion last week asking for conditions on how the defense stores and uses the papers. With the US besieged by a right-wing culture war campaign that aims to strip away rights from LGBTQ+ people and others, blame tends to be focused on Republican politicians and conservative media figures. But lurking behind efforts to roll back abortion rights, to demonize trans people, and to peel back the protections afforded to gay and queer Americans is a shadowy, well-funded, right-wing legal organization, experts have said. Since it was formed in 1994, Alliance Defending Freedom has been at the centre of a nationwide effort to limit the rights of women and LGBTQ plus people, all in the name of Christianity. The Southern Poverty Law Centre has termed it an anti-LGBTQ plus hate group that has extended its tentacles into nearly every area of the culture wars. In the process, it has won the ear of some of the most influential people in the US and became a danger to every American who values their freedoms, according to GLAAD, the LGBTQ plus advocacy organisation. Through model legislation and lawsuits filed across the country, ADF aims to overturn same-sex marriage, enact a total ban on abortion, and to strip away the already minimal rights that trans people are afforded in the US. Under the Trump administration, the group found its way into the highest echelons of power, advising Jeff Sessions, the then Attorney General, before he announced sweeping guidance to protect religious liberty, which chipped away at LGBTQ protections. The organisation counts among its sometime associate Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court Justice who the Washington Post reported spoke 5 times at an ADF training programme established to push a distinctly Christian worldview in every area of law. ADF is engaged in a strong campaign to put a certain type of religious view at the centre of American life, said Rabia Muka Adam, senior staff attorney at the Centre for Reproductive Rights. ADF was founded in 1994 by a group of leaders in the Christian community, according to its website. Among those leaders was James Dobson, the founder of the anti-LGBTQ Focus on the Family organisation, who has said that the 2012 Sandy Hook mass shooting, in which 20 children and 6 adults were killed, was a judgment from God because of declining church numbers. Its leaders remain involved in niche interpretations of Christianity. Kirsten Wagoner, the ADF chief executive, also serves as legal counsel to Assemblies of God, a church which encourages worshippers to speak in tongues and believes in divine healing, the power of prayer, as a medical tool. Over the past 2 decades, ADF has been a main driver in dozens of pieces of right-wing legislation and lawsuits. An unheard-of marine heatwave off the coasts of the UK and Ireland poses a serious threat to species, scientists have warned. Sea temperatures, particularly off the northeast coast of England and the west of Ireland, are several degrees above normal, smashing records for late spring and early summer. The North Sea and North Atlantic are experiencing higher temperatures, the data shows. The Met Office said global sea surface temperatures in April and May reached an all-time high for those months, according to records dating back to 1850, with June also on course to hit record high heat levels. The US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has categorized parts of the North Sea as being in a Category 4 marine heat wave, which is considered extreme, with areas off the coast of England up to 5 degrees C above what is usual. The Met Office says temperatures are likely to remain high because of the emerging El Niño weather phenomenon. Daniela Schmidt, a professor of earth sciences at the University of Bristol, said the extreme and unprecedented temperatures show the power of the combination of human-induced warming and natural climate variability like El Niño. Professor Schmidt said that heat, like on land, stresses marine organisms. In other parts of the world, there have been several mass mortalities of marine plants and animals caused by ocean heat waves, and which have caused hundreds of millions of pounds of losses in fisheries income, carbon storage, cultural values, and habitat loss. Without dramatic cuts to emissions, these heat waves will continue to destroy ecosystems. However, as this is happening below the surface of the ocean, it can go unnoticed. Marine heat waves are becoming more numerous, a 2019 study found, with the number of heatwave days having tripled in the past couple of years. The number of heatwave days rose by more than 50% in the 30 years to 2016, compared with 1925 to 1954. The damage caused in these hotspots is also harmful to humanity, which relies on the oceans for oxygen, food, storm protection, and the removal of climate-heating carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. A report by the Met Office says warmer than usual marine temperatures are contributing to a reduction in sea ice. It found the amount of Arctic ice was well below average for the time of year, but still above record low levels after near average ice loss during May. However, Antarctic sea ice extent is exceptionally low, the lowest on record for this date by a wide margin. And that is all that we have for you this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the generous support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 in order that we can pay the bills. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you will also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. On this day in 1937 saw the death of J.M. Barrie, the novelist and dramatist best known for inventing the character of Peter Pan. Barrie died of pneumonia at a nursing home in Manchester Street, Marylebone, but he is buried at Kirriemuir next to his parents and two of his siblings. Before his death, he gave the rights to the Peter Pan works to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London, which continues to benefit from those rights to this day. We will be back tomorrow evening at 7 with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so come back and join us then. But I can see that the debate in the House of Commons is continuing at the moment, so we're going to cut over to the House of Commons now so that you can continue to see and hear more of the debate on the Privileges Committee report into Boris Johnson's lying and contempt. Meanwhile, it's bye-bye from me.
What has happened in the labour market, he didn't misunderstand the figures, and he also accepted that employment was in fact less than before the pandemic. He said he was going to correct the record on that point, which he didn't do, but he did recognise that his claim had been mistaken. But despite that, he carried on subsequently making the claim. He said it again the next month, on the 20th of April, and again on the 27th of April. In his final question time as Prime Minister on the 20th of July last year, he said, and I quote, "We have more people in paid employment than at any time in the history of this country," despite knowing well that that was untrue. My conclusion from all of this, which I think does shed some light on the events covered by the report, is that Mr. Johnson just isn't interested in whether a statement is true or not. He's a clever man. He thinks quite hard about what he plans to say, but the criterion, is this true, is not an important consideration for him. He's concerned about the effect. I will give way, yeah.
A good speech, and I think Boris had a complicated relationship with the truth, and I personally am not denying that. He's been in this House for a very long time, and it's great that he's saying that truth and integrity are very important. New Labour had a reputation for injecting lies into the British political process as never before. And did he specifically, well, it's true actually, did he specifically object to the lies that were told in the run-up to the Gulf War? Because he was in Parliament.
I was in Parliament, and I do not believe that ministers at that time said things which they knew to be untrue. I think it's absolutely clear, as far as I can tell, and I'm just spelling out the facts, that the former Prime Minister did say in this House things which he knew well to be untrue, because I had the chance to discuss it with him at the liaison committee and he agreed it was untrue, but he carried on saying it. Yeah.
So when ministers were sexing up documents about WMD, they believed them to be true, yeah?
Yes. I do believe that those who made those points in the House at the time believed that they were untrue. It subsequently became clear that they weren't. But I do defy anyone to claim otherwise about Boris Johnson, given that this particular history that I've recounted. And that approach, as we've been reminded in this debate, to politics is toxic for democracy. What is the point of us day after day standing up and asking ministers questions if they routinely give us answers they know to be untrue? We've got no chance of building confidence in Parliament, in democracy, in politics, if ministers don't care whether what they say is true or not. Now, maybe there is a contrary argument that great men shouldn't have to worry about such trivial details. But the committee here is absolutely right. If that view prevailed, our democracy would be at very serious risk, as I think it is across the Atlantic at the moment as well. Thank goodness that the committee, Boris Johnson having made a pretty successful career out of not telling the truth, thank goodness that the committee was willing to take a stand. They are absolutely right, and I hope the whole House will support them this evening.
Bob Seeley.
Actually, Mr Deputy Speaker, okay, firstly, I accept the Privileges Committee, and I thank the chair of the committee and everyone who worked on it. Trust and integrity is important in politics. People think that politicians sometimes lack that. And I think when there's a chance to show it, I think it's when there's a chance to show us doing the right things, I think it's important that it happens. So I will vote for this report, and I accept the substance of it, whilst respecting some of the points made by my honourable friends from the Don Valley, from North East Somerset, and from Great Grimsby. Although I think they've got a case, I'm afraid to say it doesn't quite convince me. I have to say more broadly, I am so over Boris, and I'm pretty over lockdown as well. And I think sometimes, and really the point I want to make tonight, is that we are in danger of making Westminster look small and petty. Do not get me wrong. Truth and politicians at the dispatch box telling the truth is a fundamental building block. It's a keystone to this place. But for every person here, or every person watching who says, fantastic, you're getting Boris, or, you know, the Privileges Committee is doing its job, I can tell you now, from my own inbox, there are other people saying, yet again, you're talking about yourselves. Yet again, it's politicians talking about process. There were other big scandals to do with lockdown, arguably that had more impact on our nation. That is not to deny the importance of Boris's casual attitude with the truth. He saw lockdowns as being difficult to obey, and frankly he was right in that. At that point, a wiser leader would probably have questioned his own rules, not sought to get around them. They were, after all, his rules, and remorse, you can love Boris, but I think it's true to say that remorse is probably not one of his finer qualities. But for me, the scandal of lockdown, or COVID, and how we dealt with it, is not only whether there were wine Fridays and cake in Downing Street, and people in protest carrying about pints of milk, but actually whether lockdown worked. The cost of lockdown in terms of lives, in terms of learning, in terms of sanity, in terms of money, and in terms of truth. And I have to say, since lockdown, we have had an extraordinary little conversation about these critical issues. But give people a chance to give Boris a kicking, and we're queuing up to do so. So I'm just going to mention some of these other things which I think are important. Yeah.
Just before the honourable gentleman moves on to those other things, I want to reinforce the point he made, if you'd allow me, about calumnies in this House. Because by far the greatest deception I've seen in this House came when Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister, came before us and said that he had secret information that our country was at risk from weapons of mass destruction. Now, whether he was knowing or whether he was simply careless about that, the consequences were bloody. and we're now introspectively discussing cake and sandwiches. Well, that's how the public see it, and he's right about them regarding as introspective and self-indulgent.
I think for me, cake versus the lives of 179 soldiers, it's pretty easy, which I think is more important. That doesn't excuse misleading the House. But the other scandals, the other really important things, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'll run them through them briefly. We are now paying in excess deaths as our constituents die of cancers and the heart diseases that went undetected when we effectively shut down the NHS for COVID. Exactly as doctors and experts and scientists and professors such as Carol Sikora warned, and they paid a high price for it in the attacks on their integrity or why media should be carrying these comments. Given these excess deaths, it is not impossible that lockdown may end up killing more people and certainly more life years than actual lockdown did. And one report recently, and it is only one report, and there is a plethora of peer-reviewed reports, and one does try to follow some of them, suggested that lockdown may have saved 1,700 lives. That is the current equivalent of the UK's natural deaths in about 26 and a half hours. That is a cost of shutting down our schools, the 400 billion, etc. But I'll come to the next scandal. Our schools were shut. A disaster which has stalled education improvement. 100,000 kids, ghost kids, disappeared off the rolls. What's happened to these kids? Drifting into abuse, mental health crisis, drugs, crime, solitude, loneliness. We don't know. It is one of the great scandals of the day, and actually I think it's got the shadow leader of the opposition is shaking her head saying that what's that got to do with this? I think the point I'm trying to make, I'll take an intervention if she wants, the point I'm trying to make is that there are important scandals to do with lockdown, and I don't defend Boris.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, seeing he's invited me to. I just want to clarify, this debate is actually about this privileges report into whether or not Boris Johnson knowingly misled the House. It's not about whether or not the lockdown rules were good or bad. That may be a debate worthy of parliamentary time, but that's not this debate.
It is a debate worthy of parliamentary time, and when I held a debate on the use of imperial modelling, not a single member of the Labour Party turned up apart from the front bench. So actually the point I'm trying to make is that there were scandals and important things about lockdown, and one of the things that we are criticised for, as the Deputy Leader of the, as the Shadow Leader of the House will know, is that obsession with ourselves, when there were great and important other things to be discussing around COVID and lockdown, not only whether Downing Street had...
Order, just... We have to remember what we're discussing today without going too wide, because there are 14 other people who want to contribute in this debate, and I think they want to really talk about what's within the report. Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed. I will then wind up if you think I'm speaking out of turn or too wide. But I was going to say, in terms of our mental health crisis, that is a scandal worth reporting. The fact that it cost 400 billion, the fact that science was misused and trust abused. Lockdown was an experiment, and I do think sometimes the focus of the lockdown debate to be around the behaviour of the Prime Minister, I think, is too narrow and does not do this House a service. As I say in winding up, I will vote to support this. Privileges Committee report, but I do wish, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the same level of interest, especially from the opposition, may sometimes focus on the stuff that actually made a difference in lockdown and not just vindictively going after Boris Johnson. Thank you.
Andrew Bridgen.
Mr Deputy Speaker, all that glitters is not gold. The Overton window is framed by a vignette of deceit, and my honourable and right honourable colleagues seem intent on paying homage to it above all else. Some will say, and some have said, that Boris Johnson misled the committee and misled Parliament. Others that the committee set out to achieve their predetermined goal of finding him guilty on all charges. The public, many of them hold both views at once, and it's not mutually exclusive, so this pantomime staggers on. The reality is that Parliament and the public are about as far out of lockstep with each other as they've ever been. I'm not sure that the public really care in the real world too much about this anymore. I think very few people out there in the real world trust Boris Johnson, and sadly I think through the process we've seen and the collateral damage to this reputation of the House, I think the Privileges Committee itself has been damaged and may be damaged further by revelations. It's very much, for the public concern, is a plague on all our houses. What's caused this loss of public confidence in the procedures of this House? Well, the evidence is damning. Boris Johnson and his government used behavioural scientists and spin doctors to clinically instill unreasonable fear, to scare the public into ceasing their normal lives under the guise of a biological threat so deadly they dared not go outside to see another person. We all remember the relentless day in, day out informing the public by ministers in Number 10 of death rates and horror stories. Remember the signs everywhere we looked at. Remember the adverts on the television. Remember the supermarket car parks, filled with masked citizens forced to each stand in their own car parking bay. The relentless messaging from Number 10. Stand on the stickers, follow the signposts, wash your hands, don't see your loved ones. The government decided it was its job to be that of a parent and saw the country as a toddler's playgroup, turning our police into teaching assistants, au pairs and, dare I say it, nannies. On every single account, they robbed the public of their dignity. It was nothing short of unacceptable. Our ancestors would be rightly ashamed of the situation. And during that period, the public yet again showed their natural inclination as to fellow Brits. That was good-natured compliance and community spirit. We saw some of the largest demonstrations of kindness I've ever seen. And those demonstrations under immense pressure that show the real spirit of the British people. Their altruism held up a mirror to the true nature of the appalling behaviour at Number 10. Any contention the public had that Number 10, they had the latest, most accurate scientific data in front of them, and therefore these measures were justified in the face of the extreme risk, now has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on the truth. The fact is that the same people who took the unprecedented powers to suspend our freedoms knew that these measures were nothing short of political posturing. They knew they were pointless. If the risks were really what they said they were, and the science of the effectiveness of the lockdowns were that demonstrable, then surely they would have been the most...
Order. Mr Ridgeon, you heard what I said to Mr Seeley. We are talking about the contents of the report, and you're going way wider than that now. Mr Bridgen.
Well, I think the behaviour, Mr Deputy Speaker, of Number 10, it was...
So will the Honourable Gentleman give way?
I will give way to the Honourable...
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Look, whilst it's very exciting to see what's going on, to remove a Prime Minister with an 80-seat majority, can we not just think about what happened here, or didn't happen here? So the police, the Sue Gray, what did they actually come up with? The guy being delivered a piece of cake. Look, I would have been the first person, if Boris had had parties in the flat or whatever else, I would have stood up here and I would have whinged about it. But the reality is, what we know is he accepted a piece of cake. So can people not accept that just possibly the guy stood there and really did not believe he was misleading the House?
I thank the Honourable for his question and his misplaced loyalty to Boris Johnson. I think is laudable. But I mean, the behaviour in Downing Street bore closer resemblance to the set of Love Island than a collection of our country's top minds and high performers working tirelessly to steer us through dangerous waters. This at the same time as they went further than any of the British governments gone before them to take more and more powers under the wing of the state. The question is, are our internal parliamentary committees and state inquiries agenda-driven? Well, who can fault the public for thinking probably are? Because, you know, when you look at the COVID inquiry that started now, they're requiring all participants to take lateral flow tests in 2023. Yes, the bubble surrounding the Westminster political elite has become absolutely opaque. The public can't understand it, and they can't understand the public. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid the bubble has well and truly burst. But the consensus still around the lockdowns that they were sensible, practical, acceptable for the public, and the only discussion ever allowed in this place is how long the lockdown should be. But lockdowns and restrictions, they weren't for anybody at Number 10. They were only for the little people. So if the data had really indicated that the virus was the most vicious threat to the country's ever faced in our lifetime, they're the words of the former Prime Minister himself, then why were those who were seeing the data firsthand and were privy to all the later briefings continually breaching their own rules? While they locked us out of in our houses, they went to parties. When they forced us to wear masks, they broke out the party hats. They closed our schools and they opened the bottles. Well, I'm glad they had such a good time, because the rest of our experience and collective memories, I've already given way to the honourable gentleman. The rest of our experiences of the collective memories of lockdown were not that great, to be honest. It was isolation, destroyed livelihoods, missed goodbyes to loved ones, and a new relationship with our state that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to history lessons in modern China, something none of us ever dreamed of would be true in present-day Britain. We're all human, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with all our human failings, and our health is incredibly important to us all, and we all welcome modern advances in medicine which over the centuries have reduced the nastier realities of life, but we never wanted this. What has happened at the top of our government? Rule makers of the COVID regulations deemed that their work meetings were more important than our children's education. It's almost as if they wanted to make incompetence endemic. We can never give the children back the years they lost of their schooling. We can never give the public back the time we robbed from them. But we can give them answers and legislative assurance that we'd never, ever replay this fiasco. And now, finally, Mr. Speaker, let's sign the whole thing off as a job badly done, a chapter to consign to history, a stark lesson of how not to govern. The people of North West Cheshire feel betrayed, and they have been betrayed, and it must never, ever happen again.
Gentle reminder, it is this report that we're talking about today and its findings. So if people could perhaps, even if they've got speeches that they wrote 2 days, 3 days ago, and it contains things that aren't relevant to the report, please could they lose those pages and concentrate on this, please. And Jess Phillips is going to show us how to do it.
I will very much focus on the report. I think that, to comment on the last two speakers, not necessarily the wildly tangential line that they went down, but the idea that everybody's a bit sick of this and they don't want to be talking about it. Well, quite a lot of people have been in touch with me whilst this debate has been going on, watching this debate. And one of the people who got in touch with me is a brilliant woman called Mina Smallman, whose daughters, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, were killed during the period that our country was in lockdown in a double murder. And she has said to me, please mention our story and Biba and Nicole. Had they broken the rules, they would still be alive, because they went to a picnic in a park and they staggered it so that there wouldn't be too many people, because they understood the regulations, and because of that they were murdered. She also says Sarah Everard was so frightened of the COVID regulations she ended up dead. So there were people in our country who listened to Boris Johnson talking on the television. They took away from him what the rules were as the primary message giver in the pandemic. They understood the rules, and it cost them their lives in a completely different way to that has been discussed so far. The idea that Boris Johnson didn't understand the regulations, I mean, it's a cracking defence on his part, I have to say, because it basically means he's too stupid. He's either lying or he's thick. And as somebody said, somebody wasn't mutually exclusive earlier. I think that's the case in this instance as well. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. I didn't come to this place as a big cheerleader of it. I felt like I was going to think that parliamentary procedure was silly in lots of regards, and all this Northstead bailiffing has not disavowed me of that in the last couple of weeks. But what I found here was that I became a total cheerleader for parliamentary democracy, and I hadn't expected to. It's really been quite a shock to me that I became such a cheerleader of parliamentary democracy. But because it matters, the people in our country putting trust in us to do the right thing really, really matters. And I think that since I have been here, I have seen the fragility of it, where lies, misdirection, constant feeling like you're never getting an answer. I'll tell you one thing, if we were to hear something from our constituents that they say over and over again is, oh my God, just answer the question. Yeah. Like, that is the most pressing thing for most people in our country is, oh my God, could you just get someone to answer the bloody question, excuse my language. I'm quoting the public. They said it worse. It could have been much worse. And so it really, really matters. It really, really matters that the institution of this place be protected and that it's considered to be truthful and honest. And the only people who are served by the public hating politicians and hating the institution of Parliament are the same people who already hold power. It doesn't, it is so important for the people to feel empowered in the thing that represents them, that is there to drive them. And if they opt out and say, you're all the same, you're all liars, you're all cheats, the same people who always ruled always will rule. They don't mind that people say that. The importance of telling the truth in this place and respecting the systems that we all have to live by, that we all vote through, that, like this committee, we all voted for it, we all passed it through this building. It matters so much more, and that is why I really stand here to say that I've watched it degrade, and for the first time in this Privileges Committee report, I felt like it has a chance to come back. Yeah. I felt like there is a lock on the system. I felt like there is a valve to release the pressure. That what I have seen for the past 5 years of people lying and deceiving, specifically Boris Johnson, lying and deceiving, I felt like, oh gosh, it's okay. The system is bigger than this demagogue. It is bigger than this man who thinks he's bigger than the world, who thinks he's more important than the world. The system fought back and with honour, and I thank the members of the committee for their hard work. And his demagoguery in its receipt of the report should surprise absolutely no one. Yeah. It is to be laughed at, frankly, and the public is laughing at it. It looks really desperate. And some of the defences that I have heard today on behalf of members trying to stick up for Boris Johnson looks a little bit like people dancing on the head of a pin. And frankly, they were laughable. And people are watching. I feel very bad for the fact that that is going to be represented as if it's the Conservative Party's view, when there are very decent members who will absolutely do the right thing and stick up for democracy. I think it is a crying shame that in this moment of release valve, that the Prime Minister of our country cannot even express how he would vote if he were to turn up today. In my view, that is a dereliction of duty. Democracy has been degraded. It is important to fight for it. I cannot believe that he couldn't take 5 seconds out of parroting his pledges to tell us what he thinks should happen. I cannot believe, and I absolutely praise the Leader of the House today for showing leadership in this regard. I cannot believe that the Prime Minister cannot even express what his view is one way or another. I absolutely will.
Interestingly enough, he didn't express a view on Owen Paterson either.
There are many things that I think are matters of conscience in this place that when I look back on the record that the Prime Minister of the day has not expressed a view on, and I just think it's, I think it's weak. And I think it's quite a lot of parliamentary words I'm probably not allowed to say, so I won't say them. I can now say that Boris Johnson is a liar. And I believe that the member for Brent Central will be speaking after me and has been completely vindicated by the fact that we can all say that Boris Johnson is a liar. I just wish that there had been a united front today. I understand that it's a matter of conscience and there will always be some people who feel a different way, and I totally respect that. I think it's a real shame if the House cannot express today how important democracy is to us because of the failure of one leader leading to the weakness of the next.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, we all owe a depth of gratitude to the Privileges Committee and to the Chair, Camberwell and Peckham, who's had to actually sit through some of the strangest speeches that I've heard in this House. Honestly, and I thank the member for Birmingham Yardley for mentioning Mina Smallman, who is an amazing woman who continues to fight to keep the memory of her daughters alive and to change the system, whether that be the police or even any other systems. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is all about democracy. The trust that should exist between the government and those that are governed has been badly damaged, and the question must be to every single member of this House is, how do we repair that damage? And the way we do that is that we must demand transparency, honesty and integrity from those who hold positions of power, those that stand at the dispatch box. And the leader of the House gave an impassioned speech saying just that, because we must not tolerate the casual disregard for truth that has become the hallmark of this government. It should shame us all. We are honourable members of Parliament. It isn't just a title. It is something that we should hold dear. We should be honourable in what we do in this place. We should be honourable to the people that we serve because they have elected us. And democracy demands honourable conduct. And we haven't seen much of that over the last few years. And if we allow lies to go unchecked and deceit to become the norm, then our democracy begins to crumble. And that's what's been happening. We sit here time and time again, we see ministers come into the dispatch box and we're all saying, but that's not true, that's not true. And we're standing up and we're saying, but that's not true. And then we're saying, we're not allowed to say it's not true. We have to say they've inadvertently misled the House. They will come back to the House and correct the record. And they never come back. They tell a lie, they sit down, they have a goofy grin on their face, then they walk out and they never come back to correct the records. And that is a problem for our democracy. And this House must be able to call truth to power. This House, members of this House, honourable members of this House, must be able to stand up and say, that is incorrect. Otherwise, what is the point and the purpose? And we must also not be so obsessed with the archaic rules of this House. We must be honest with ourselves and say, we've got to challenge the rules of this House if they're not working. We've got to challenge the system of this House if it's not working. And I do think it's a nonsense that you cannot call somebody a liar if they are lying. I think it's a nonsense of this House. And people say, well, then it's just going to degrade the House and everyone's going to be calling each other a liar. Well, if you don't want to be called a liar, don't lie. If you don't want to be called a liar, tell the truth. That is the solution to the problem. And the truth must prevail and integrity must be restored. And the thing is, we are currently, all members of this House, we are the guardian of our democracy right now in this House. And I don't think, I'm sorry, that we are doing a really good job. We must do much better. But this report does bring some of that back. And the thing is this, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's quite ironic that 2 years ago I was thrown out of Parliament, this place, for calling Johnson a liar. And the irony is that if he wasn't such a weasel and if he didn't resign, he would have been thrown out of this place for 90 days for lying. And that is the irony of this situation. And I think that, I mean, okay, yeah, it would have made me a little bit happy to see him thrown out the house. but ultimately, it isn't about that. It is about our system in this place. Yep. And we have got to do better. It wasn't easy breaking the convention of the House. You know, I got a lot of abuse by some of the members opposite. You know, how dare she? Blah, 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 blah. And but that was a Jacob Rees-Mogg impression. But and I do talk about the aftermath of what it was like in my book, A Purposeful Life. And sometimes I wonder, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what is the purpose of Parliament if we can't hold ministers to account, if we're just going to allow them to lie? And, you know, Johnson knew he was lying. We all knew he was lying. And he knew we knew he was lying. But the system protected him. Yep. And what we have to do is change the system. So the system doesn't protect the liar or the lies. The system protects Parliament and our democracy. We need to change a system. And the thing is, as we get...
Would my friend give word?
Absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for making a very passionate and honest speech. Honesty is the best policy. In terms of the system that she alluded to in protecting the former Prime Minister, does she agree with me that the motion that we're discussing today, privilege, that privilege is not sometimes afforded to other members of this Parliament, even though we are all elected in the same way? That privilege of saying and doing what you want is not afforded to some members in this chamber.
Yes. I thank my honourable friend for that important intervention, and you're absolutely right. Some people's privilege extends beyond this House. So when they lie in this House, they also have the privilege of their mates in the newspapers, you know, and on the media that then protects that lie and that privilege and puts that coat of protection around them. And actually, our democracy needs to be strong enough to stop that from happening and exposing that from happening. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we get ever closer to a general election, ministers will try and whip up moral panic, and they will begin to spread further lies, and they will push this fake culture war, some of it that we've seen on display today. And we actually can't wait for 2 years for a privileges committee to find them guilty of lying or misleading the House, because that would be too late. So the question has to be, what do we do, where do we go, and who's going to stand up for democracy and truth? And the member, the former Prime Minister, is no longer in her place. The member for Maidenhead said that as a Prime Minister, it was difficult to make decisions on friends. And I understand that, because you know, you're going to make a decision on somebody and then you may be standing with them in the queue in the tea room and you're going to feel bad about it. So I completely understand where the former Prime Minister was coming from. So I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that a solution should be that we should take that responsibility away from the Prime Minister, and it should become the responsibility of the House when somebody breaks the ministerial code. Because you cannot have, like we had, the Prime Minister deciding who's lying and not lying when he was the chief liar himself. So that responsibility should become the House's responsibility. And I've retabled my EDM, which I tabled in 2021, and I then had 105 signatures, and I do hope more members will sign that EDM about how we talk about the Minister's Code of Conduct. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I end, can I just say that the Parliament record shows that I was asked to withdraw from Parliament for calling Johnson a liar, and I will be writing to the House just to wonder if that could possibly be expunged or some kind of amendment or addendum besides it to say, you know, that it was actually correct and he was a liar. Yeah. I just wonder if I will do that and put that on record. And I would just like to end on Boris Johnson's favourite, I understand, politician, Winston Churchill, who said, "There could be no democracy without truth."
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend from Brent Central. And of course, the responsibility that we all have in this House is to defend democracy. And we have that responsibility. We own collectively the rules of this House, and we need to consider very carefully where we need to refresh them. Let me thank all the members of the Privileges Committee for the report. This is a damning report. The Privileges Committee has found that Boris Johnson was guilty of deliberately misleading the House, deliberately misleading the committee, breaching confidence, impugning the committee and thereby undermining the democratic process of this House, our House, and being complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. You know, we need to think very carefully about this, because we now know that members of the committee have had to have put in place additional protection because of the actions of the former Prime Minister. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is a disgrace that members of this House are having their security threatened by the actions of Boris Johnson. And of course, these would be the more serious matters for any member of this House. But for someone who was Prime Minister to be guilty in such a manner is absolutely unprecedented. But before I get into the report, let us remind ourselves as to how we got into this position. The character, the personality, the traits of Boris Johnson were known long before he became Tory leader and Prime Minister. Indeed, during the contest when he was elected the Tory leader, during Prime Minister's questions on the 19th of June 2019, I said to the then Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, regarding Boris Johnson, this is a man who is not fit for office. It has been said that the ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort, but where they stand at times of challenge and controversy. This is a time of challenge, so does the Prime Minister realise that he has a record of dishonesty? Does the Prime Minister honestly believe that this man is fit for the office of Prime Minister? Mr Deputy Speaker, we knew all about Boris Johnson. The Tory members knew all about Boris Johnson, and yet, they were prepared to elect such a figure as their leader and impose him upon us as our Prime Minister. Sadly, there was always an inevitability that would end in a dramatic way for Boris Johnson. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, we all suffer for his failure to respect the responsibilities that go with the office of Prime Minister. So let me ask the few Tory members who sit opposite us why, just why, were they prepared to elect a leader with a history of dishonesty? Honesty, integrity are characteristics that we expect from our political leaders. Not just expect, but demand. We have a responsibility to society to lead by example. In this place, we are either honourable or right honourable members. Some of us may find the rules at this place belong to another time. But that very principle of being honourable, of having honour and behaving with honour, do strike at the very heart as a key tenet of our democracy. We have to show that we are all worthy of the respect of the public, or we are all diminished. That is why the behaviour of Boris Johnson in office matters. The backdrop to the matters under consideration, of course, was the COVID pandemic. How often did we stand in this chamber and applaud our NHS, all our frontline workers, and implored society, the public, to follow the lockdown rules, the sacrifices that so many made? The rules, Mr Deputy Speaker, were for the rest of us. They were not for Boris Johnson or those around him. But now we have the verdict of the Privileges Committee. The verdict is indeed a confirmation. Boris Johnson is a liar. We knew this long before now. It isn't, of course, the first time that the Prime Minister has been caught out by his mistruths. Sacked from the Times for making up a quote. Sacked from the Tory front bench for lying about an affair. This is a well-trodden path of a man who believes he is above the rules that the rest of us must follow. He is the epitome of the Westminster bubble that no longer serves others, but instead only serves themselves. But we are here today because truth still matters. Partygate was a sorry and unforgivable episode, even by the low standards that this government has set. Bring your own bottle events and multiple large gatherings with very little adherence to social distancing measures, all the while people around the world made unimaginable sacrifices to help stop the virus. It is all covered in this report, and Johnson's desperate excuses are a slap in the face for those who missed funerals, who missed last words with lost ones, and those whose mental health scars them from isolation and anxiety remains today. He argues that parties were necessary as a thank you to staff and to help to motivate. Try telling the NHS staff, those on the front line who battled the pandemic day in, day out, who were stuck to do what they were told by this government. It is hypocrisy on stilts. His other get-out was that he followed the guidance as he understood it. How can he be accountable if he didn't even understand his own laws? It was the last desperate stand of a desperate man. He tried to treat the committee and the public like idiots. He knew the rules. He broke them willingly, and then he lied about it afterwards. Startlingly, not content with these most dishonourable actions, his behaviour during and after his investigation has been almost contemptible. He has deployed the full Trump handbook of trying to burn all around him to save his own skin. Not only did the committee find that he misled them in Parliament, but he also engaged in a campaign of abuse towards their members to undermine their findings. He called them a kangaroo court, their findings deranged, and called into question their motives and impartiality at every turn. And let's remember, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a majority Tory committee. These tactics were transparent. It's classic Trump, which is why politics across these islands is well rid of Boris Johnson. Neither Johnson nor Trump has any issue undermining democratic institutions for their ill-gotten gains. It's born out of the same entitled, born-to-rule mentality. I could always see these traits in Johnson, so I'm so pleased that the committee has stood up to his threat and let the truth prevail. The truth is also that whilst Johnson is the nadir of Tory sleaze, he wasn't the only one who attended these parties. He was in charge at the time, but remember dozens, literally dozens around number 10, received similar fines. Johnson has perhaps shown us one thing, that actions do have consequences, and lies will catch up with you. As it is, Boris Johnson is once again the talk of the town, again for all the wrong reasons. The committee concluded that he should be suspended from Parliament for 90 days. He, of course, took the coward's way out and resigned instead of facing up to the punishment. A mark of the man, if there ever was one. He will continue his crusade to undermine and attack, just as Trump does in the face of his own struggles in the USA. However, I hope that the public now largely see through Boris Johnson's bluff and bluster. I think the most significant punishment for him is the populist fondness that he once enjoyed is now over. It is something that his ego will take severely. I genuinely hope that Johnson's toxic legacy and descent into Trump-style tactics are seen to be precisely that. He has no power now. He has no influence. Make sure he is never allowed it again. But as we close the door on Boris Johnson, more and more is coming out into the public domain. The contempt of those at Conservative Central Office Christmas party, as witnessed in the video published by the Mirror this weekend. The behaviour of contempt is still with us. Boris Johnson's resignation orders are just the latest example. A junior special advisor, just in her 30s, given a job for life, as a member of the House of Lords. Many were implicated in Partygate receiving honours. To the public, this is sickening. Where is the leadership of the current Prime Minister? He should have stepped in to stop Boris Johnson offering such tainted honours. An ex-Prime Minister in disgrace cannot be allowed to confer honours. Will the Prime Minister step in now and bring a stop to this? Will he reverse the honours? Mr Deputy Speaker, let us tonight put this report to a vote. Let the House endorse the Privileges Committee report, and let's have a roll call of those going through the eye lobby. And then, let's finally put an end to the very sorry chapter that was Boris Johnson's political career.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I won't detain the House too long, but I just want to put 3 points on the record on behalf of my constituents. The first being that I am sorry to say to them, my constituents in particular, I am sorry to say that the feeling of Boris Johnson being at that dispatch box as Prime Minister and coming into this House for Prime Minister's questions and feeling that it was pointless to ask a question because the answer could not be relied upon will not ever leave me as long as I'm in politics. Because when the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead was at the dispatch box, or when any other Prime Minister in this House has been at the dispatch box other than him, I always felt political disagreements, substantial as they are, put aside, if I asked a question as a constituency Member of Parliament, I would get an answer that could be relied upon. I might disagree with it, I might want it to be better, but I would rely on it on behalf of my constituents. And I will never forget that sinking feeling that being in this place on behalf of my constituents was pointless. And I think that that is the truth that's at the heart of this report. The diligent, hard work of members on all sides of this House, on a Conservative majority committee that have worked so hard to produce this evidence, gives us the truth of what has happened. And I think that my second point is that whilst I am sorry that we have been through this terrible time for parliamentary democracy, I am proud to be in this House today and to have listened to the Leader of the House, with whom I agree, to the Shadow Leader of the House, with whom I agree, to listen to the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, with whom I agree, to listen to the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham, the Mother of this House, with whom I agree, and who has done a diligent job under very difficult circumstances to bring the truth of the situation to the attention of this House. I think we should be glad that we are in this position, that at last we have clarity, we know what has happened and we can account for it. And because we can account for it, we can begin to try to understand exactly what has happened and how this came to be. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's kind of a funny thing in a way that lots of people in public life have commented that we sort of knew the truth of what Boris Johnson was like for a very long time. We did all kind of know that. And how did it come to this position where he was able to tell these untruths from the dispatch box and then we had to go through this process? How was it, Mr Deputy Speaker, I asked myself, that his word was taken with credulence when we all had little reason, really, to believe what he was saying? That's the question I ask myself. And I think the unfortunate truth that we have to reckon with is that one of the injustices that we face in this country is that some people's testimony is taken as truth more readily than others. I tend to agree with those who've mentioned that structural inequality that we have, that some people's word is taken for truth. Why was it that some people were so terrified of the COVID regulations when other people, particularly Boris Johnson, as covered in this report, clearly didn't care or clearly felt that it didn't matter what they did? And it's because we know that power inequality, that structural inequality in our country means that some people's word is taken for truth more readily than others. And this is my final point, Mr Deputy Speaker. We have so much to learn from this report, and many members have discussed it well, and this has been a good and strong debate. We have so much to learn from this report, and we can all move forward and get it right across this House. But if we don't reckon with that injustice, that it is somehow so much easier for some people to get a hearing than for others in our country. We will never change the power structures. And this House in the future must welcome people who are from different backgrounds, who speak with different accents, who come from different social classes, who've done different jobs. We must be a better House at listening to all voices in our country and not just some people who, for historic reasons, get heard when others don't.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's an absolute pleasure to follow on from my dear friend, the member for Wirral South. I want to rise in support of the Privileges Committee report and to pay tribute to them, to all of the members, but particularly the chairman of this committee, the Right Honourable Member for Campbell and Peckham, for the diligence and the evidence-based approach that they have taken and the final report that they have produced. The findings in that, I think, are clear. As an evidence-based scientist, I see the line, the golden thread that's going through the report in terms of how they are using that evidence, and I think it is a very strong report in that regard. But what's so disappointing, as much as we have discussed this today, is that it is exposing the shameful behaviour of a Prime Minister of this country. We've talked about the impact that is happening across our country, but it has international ramifications as well, which we haven't discussed in detail. I have absolutely no doubt that Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House of Commons, not just in relation to the parties that the report is focused on. And while people in Oldham and Saddleworth and across the country sacrificed so much during the pandemic lockdowns, Mr. Johnson and his team had parties. And as they partied, they knew they were breaking the rules. Then as Prime Minister, he lied about it on the floor of the House and to the committee. I also have evidence of how the former Prime Minister deliberately deceived the House in February 2021 in relation to the publication of COVID contracts. The member for Brighton Pavilion and the member for Oxford Western Abingdon and I were involved in a High Court action which showed absolutely what contracts had been published according to law and what hadn't. And Boris Johnson said, no, they've all been conducted. We had a High Court decision saying they had not been published. This is the absolute gall of the man who, as I say, was our Prime Minister. And when I raised, and this gets back to the point that my honourable friend from Wirral South was saying, when I raised this in the House, it wasn't listened to. It was a question, this is your view. As I say, I pointed to the High Court judgment. It was a question, this is your view. And I tried on a number of occasions, including on the 20th of April 2021. But Mr. Johnson's most recent antics are quite breathtaking in their selfishness. His denial is quite breathtaking, it really is. The absolute polar opposite of what the Nolan principles, the standards in public life that we all agree to abide by, demand of us. His pattern of behaviour, underpinned by an attitude that he is above the law, has tarnished the reputation of the whole House and all its parliamentarians. We are all tarred with the same brush, and our democracy as a whole suffers. The group Compassion in Politics polling has shown that 8 out of 10 people don't trust politicians. Now that is serious. It is the lowest level of trust that we have ever had by the people that we represent. How can we represent people if they don't trust us? This report was ultimately about honesty, another of the 7 Nolan principles of public life. It should mark a sea change with regard to the honesty in politics, because in recent years we have seen the rise of politicians who believe that they can mislead without consequences. Earlier this year, I introduced an elected representatives code of conduct bill to this place, which proposed to establish an ethics commission to look at how we bring our political system into the 21st century. I have to disagree in some regards with my honourable friend, the member for Rhondda. I think we are past the point where we can be, we can say that we can govern ourselves. And my bill introduced a number of proposals within that which did look to strengthen the gaps as far as this is concerned. It also looked to ensure that the advice on the ministerial standards is fully independent, which of course he at the moment isn't. And is able to commission his or her own inquiries rather than being subject to the whims of political leaders acting in the interests of their own internal party dynamics. While the content of the Privileges Committee report is a truly egregious example of this, it is far from the only one. 10 days ago, I wrote to the Prime Minister asking him to explain the decision he took to ask the advisor on ministerial standards not to investigate allegations that the Home Secretary pressured civil servants into assisting her with a speeding fine she received. My letter asked the Prime Minister whether or not he spoke to Home Office officials and special advisers to ask if the Home Secretary's version of events was accurate. It also asked him if he reviewed emails sent by the Home Office civil servants to the Cabinet Office's Propriety and Ethics team, where they expressed concerns about what was being asked of them by the Home Secretary. And it asked him if the independent adviser reviewed any correspondence or conducted any interviews on this matter. To date, I have not received a reply. I wait in anticipation to see if the Prime Minister will fulfil his promise to lead a government with integrity at every level.
You're on, Marsha.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I just begin by expressing my thanks to my right honourable friend, the member for Camberwell and Peckham, for her stewardship and the way she has chaired this Privileges Committee with such strength and integrity, and also thanks to all the members of that committee as well. Now, the report was a damning indictment of the former Prime Minister's behaviour, finding that, yes, he indeed deliberately misled this House. Now, this was no surprise to me, as, in my opinion, he was never suitable for high office, especially the great office of state of the Office of Prime Minister, given his disgraceful track record. Now, there is an old saying that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And let's face it, there is a litany of examples of Mr Johnson's failures and lies. He lied about Brexit, he was sacked for lying multiple times, indeed, he lied to the late Her Majesty the Queen. So, I will be voting to endorse this report, although I wish the committee actually chose to ban him for life, but I want to encourage all honourable members opposite to also join us in the lobbies. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are just a few points that I want to raise. And firstly, it's around leadership and accountability. In this place, we are all leaders, and I believe leaders must lead by example, holding oneself to a higher standard and level of accountability, following laws, following rules, and really, as representatives of the people, to our constituents as well. So this is even more important during the global health emergency. But as Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he was meant to be responsible for ensuring that everyone in this country was working towards that shared common goal of defeating COVID. So how shameful is it that he failed to uphold the laws he introduced and has shown zero accountability for his actions? He failed to show any regard for the millions of people in our country, like my constituents in Battersea, who followed the rules and the laws and made huge sacrifices. I think of those who couldn't visit their dying family members or couldn't attend their funerals. The ill and disabled people who were stuck without vital health and social care support, not to mention the blanket application of do not attempt resuscitation orders that were in place up and down this country until we had to intervene on the then Health Secretary. The small businesses who were economically impacted by lockdown, causing immense financial hardship, which some are still experiencing today. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I honestly could go on sharing more examples. But let us not forget the over 225,000 people who lost their lives to COVID. Yet no apology from the former Prime Minister. Instead, enabled by his supporters, he claimed that there has been a sustained attempt that is seemingly coordinated to weaken him. And we have seen some distasteful examples of that this evening. Now, my third point is about his persistent undermining of Parliament and the impact his reckless actions has had on Parliament and trust. Our parliamentary democracy depends on members from across the House being certain that ministers can and will be telling the truth. And for whatever reason a minister from the dispatch box makes a mistake, they will come to this House and correct the record. That is how this place should function and work. But as a Prime Minister, you would think he would know the importance of this. But he put our parliamentary democracy at risk when he thought, in fact, I believe he probably believes this, that the rules just don't apply to him, debasing the great office of state. Mr Speaker, I have to say, and I think we would all say, what message does this send to the public and our constituents? What confidence can they have in this place? And also for our political institutions, this really has to be a watershed moment for us in this place. Now, my final point has to be about our current Prime Minister and some members of the opposite benches. They knew that the former Prime Minister misled the House. They knew that he lied. They failed to act to remove him. Instead, they allowed him to continue in office. We were all here on these benches watching him from that dispatch box. Worse still, even after the lies were revealed, they thought it was right that taxpayers should pick up the tab, paying for his legal fees of up to £250,000 in this cost of living crisis. Now, as for all the talk from this current Prime Minister about integrity, he has failed to do the right thing and block the former Prime Minister's honours list, which, Mr Deputy Speaker, was well within his gift to do so. But he chose not to. Why? Because he is too weak, and his absence here today demonstrates just how weak he indeed is. The benches opposite just show you who is still in control of that party. And it is clear that the current government cannot be trusted with our precious democracy, as this government in power only govern for themselves and for their own interests. And it always has to be one rule for them and then one for everybody else. That is not good enough. They do not care about the public's interest, and we saw that not only with them keeping Boris Johnson in power for so long, but we saw it when they were handing out contracts to their friends and their cronies and so on. And I could, again, Mr Deputy Speaker, I could go on. This government has presided over one of the worst scandals in our country's history. Now, I believe it is time to restore trust in our parliamentary democracy. Because if we do not have trust in our democracy and in this place, then what do we have? It is a privilege to serve here. I see it as a privilege to serve here. It is not my right to be here. It is not nobody's right to be here. Our constituents elect us, and they elect us, and we take an oath of office when we stand in this place. And it is important that all members across this House remember that.
Florence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's an honour to follow my constituents and over my friend in terms of reminding us of our roles as MPs. I was elected in 2019, and I think for the last 3.5 years, interesting 3.5 years, one thing that I always keep dear to my heart is the fact that being an honourable member comes with responsibilities. And as my honourable friend said, there are some people, sadly, in this House who feel it is their birthright. I'm absolutely humbled to be elected by my constituents, and I take that with such pride. And every time I speak and stand in this chamber, I remember that I'm here to speak on their behalf, not my behalf. I'm here to articulate their concerns and their interests to the government of the day. I'm here to work cross-party with there are some honourable members on that side that I've done a lot of work with. Issues that are for the interests of our constituents, and that is why what we are debating matters. It is about the fabric of our democracy, and a number of people have spoken about the fact that this is a kangaroo court, this doesn't matter, but let's stick to the facts. On the 21st of April 2022, this House, without division, referred the Privilege Committee on the matter concerning the conduct of the former Prime Minister. And that committee, that cross-party committee, has at all times followed the law and the customs set by this Parliament. And the fundamental procedure is governed by the standing orders and precedent of this House. And all the evidence that that committee's heard over the course of their inquiry, including evidence from the former Prime Minister, all that evidence was given under oath, including the signed evidence. And the former Prime Minister also had the opportunity to give written evidence and oral evidence, which he did on the 22nd of March. And I understand that he subsequently gave evidence on the 22nd of May, written evidence. And after all that work, the conclusions of the committee were presented to the former Prime Minister, who then, if for want of a better word, went out on a hissy fit and got quite angry and breaking the procedures and confidentiality. And I think what we are discussing today has to matter if we are going to restore trust back into our democracy. One of the best aspects of this role is going up and down, visiting the schools. And when you speak to young people, they don't lie. They will ask you those honest questions. And to have young people in some of my constituency ask me, why are parliamentarians, why do MPs lie? It's quite hard. And when you're sat in front of those young people, what do you say? You want to say to them, the majority of members are doing a decent job. The majority of members are here to represent their constituents. But what they are seeing, what they hear about that from their parents and carers discuss, paints a different picture. That's why what we are discussing today matters. We want more young people to get involved in our politics. We want people to trust our democratic system. But that won't happen if we have ministers misleading this House.
Would the honourable member give way?
I'll give way on that point.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the honourable member is making a very, very important point. If you think about it, much of the education of our young people is based on the concept of true and false. If you come to mathematics, if you come to chemistry, if you come to physics, if you come to biology, this sum of human knowledge is based on facts. They're either right or they're wrong, and they have a clear concept of what that means. And I think that we should say to ourselves, to remind ourselves why these concepts are so very, very valuable. And I would just draw the House's attention to a poem written by Hilaire Belloc in 1907 called Matilda. Read it and it's instructive.
I thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member for his intervention there, and I agree with him. I read many books to my 8-year-old and 6-year-old, and I will definitely make sure we add that to our collection. And going back to the work of the committee, the committee found that the former Prime Minister deliberately...
She gets burnt to death.
deliberately misled the House and the committee and breached the confidence and impugned the committee and was complicit in a campaign of abuse and intimidation towards the committee. One of the sad aspects of being a Member of Parliament, again, I'm very honest when people ask me, and they say, what don't you like about your role as an MP? The abuse, the misogyny, the racism, the threats that I have faced and that other members face just for doing the job that we like. And to see that members of this committee, having been asked by us in this House to carry out this role, had them facing that abuse and intimidation is worrying. No one should have to face that for doing their role. And I want to bring us back to why all of this matters. I've spoken in this House on many occasions about the tragic death of Ismail Mohammed Adbouwali. He was 13 years old. He was one of the youngest people that lost his life. And his family couldn't attend that funeral. And I still remember when I spoke to his mum and his sisters to console them, I mentioned that that call was hard for me, and I broke down on that call. Because to hear a mother to say, I wasn't able to hold my son, I'm never going to see him again, was quite hard. And if we look at the COVID memorial wall in my constituency just across the river, walking up and down there, one cannot be moved to look at all the hearts, all the lives lost. They were the families who followed the rules. They were the ones who sacrificed those precious moments for the ones that they loved. They were the ones who will be looking at this report to say, well, why did we?
Yeah.
And not only did we have a Prime Minister who was primarily responsible for breaking the rules, then setting the rules, then breaking those rules, but we also have a former Prime Minister who then went on to mislead in the House and then being disingenuous in the statements. And the public rightly expect high standards from us. And going back to the report, this report is not just about high standards, it's about being truthful. It's about owning up to your mistakes. It's about taking responsibility. How can any of us, as honourable members, ask our constituents to trust us if we don't take those breaches of trust seriously? And it's a situation where I understand that the consequence of their own actions may be a novel concept to the former Prime Minister, but it's one that we have to deliver today if we are to ask our constituents to trust us. I'd also like to pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham, my constituency neighbour, whose fair and experienced chairing of that committee produced this report. And like I said, it's disgraceful that other committee members faced inaccurate and unjust briefings against them. I want to finish, Mr Deputy Speaker, by reading a quote from a poem on the 2nd anniversary when the first hearts were drawn on the COVID memorial wall on Wednesday the 29th of March. I attended that event with many members in this chamber. And part of the poem, entitled Anthem for the Pandemic by Susie Flintham, reads, "Ours shall still be the voice of the lost, names resurrected, candles lit, heads bowed. We the ones who contemplate the cost, we the ones who speak their names aloud. They exist between one heartbeat and another, the heart that inexplicably still beats. We speak their names while the world recovers. To us, recovery is bittersweet."
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Vauxhall and the power that was in the poem that she just quoted in particular. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Privileges Committee and in particular to the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham and for all of the staff and the clerks who supported them in this vital work, which is of profound democratic importance to this country. And I speak today with a feeling of overwhelming relief that at last the truth is being told in this House and the collective gaslighting of a nation is finally over. It is shocking, in a way, that a parliamentary committee has had to spell it out, that, and I quote, "If ministers cannot be trusted to tell the truth, the House cannot do its job." Even more shocking that on this occasion the minister in question was the most senior person in government, the Prime Minister. A Prime Minister who sought to obscure the truth from those to whom he was accountable by lying deliberately and repeatedly, and who, by lying to Parliament, was also lying to the people who elect it. And a Prime Minister who has effectively shredded the ministerial code, a crucial part of the spinal cord of the Constitution, in the words of the constitutional historian, the Lord Hennessy of Nymphsfield. Now, Boris Johnson announced on the day the report was published that, and I quote, "This is a dreadful day for MPs and for democracy." But in fact, the reverse is true. It was a day which saw British parliamentary democracy vindicated against an unprecedented attack. But I want us to be very clear that our democracy is fragile and that there was nothing inevitable about this particular outcome. I think this report shows that our good chap conventions of government allowed a rogue Prime Minister to run amok for far too long. And yes, the report offers some hope because it also shows that if an MP or indeed a Prime Minister deliberately lies and undermines the processes of this House, they can be held to account. But I say can be and not will be advisedly, because this inquiry had to be fought for. There was nothing guaranteed about it, and because our standard systems are still not fit for purpose. I think it is both negligent and dangerous to assume that democracy is inevitable, perpetual and unshakable. It is not. It is breakable and contingent. We have to actively and vigilantly defend it. And that is why standing together as a Parliament in support of this committee's report is so essential, and why it goes beyond just the rogue activities of one particular member of this Parliament. And we also need to strengthen the mechanisms that we have to hold government to account, because there remain serious instances of former ministers misleading this House that have gone uncorrected and unchallenged. We need new mechanisms to call any minister, including a Prime Minister, to account if they deliberately mislead the House, a view shared prior to Partygate in 2021 by the Committee on Standards in Public Life, chaired by Lord Evans. It is shocking that the role of the so-called independent advisor on the ministerial code is essentially false advertising, and will continue to be so until that person is appointed by an independent panel, until they are able to initiate their own investigations, and until they have the authority to determine breaches of the code. These basic yet fundamental changes would allow backbenchers to raise concerns and evidence with the advisor, who could then act as they, and not just the Prime Minister, saw fit. Now, the current Prime Minister could have made those changes, but he has chosen not to. Neither has he appointed an anti-corruption champion after the position has been left vacant for over a year. Our systems need to be strengthened so that if a minister misleads the House deliberately, or if they do it inadvertently but don't correct at the earliest opportunity, a formal process to hold them to account should be an inevitability. This inquiry only came about in April 2022 because of the spiralling unease and rebellion of some members on Boris Johnson's backbenches, which meant he couldn't whip his MPs to prevent it. Over a year before that, in April 2021, I joined with a wide cross-party group of MPs to call for an inquiry into Boris Johnson's repeated lies to the House on other matters, and it did not happen. So it was somewhat ironic to learn via a subject access request how that call has been labelled as mis or indeed disinformation by one of the government units supposed to be acting as an arbiter of accuracy and honesty. Members and honourable members of all parties must stand by this committee and demonstrate that rules matter, that Parliament is more important than party, and that standards in public life must be upheld. And honourable members on the opposite benches in particular, I would argue, must face down the Trumpian intimidation orchestrated by a small band of frankly anti-democratic Johnson supporters. And they need to be very clear that abstention is not just cowardice, it is complicity in the former Prime Minister's contempt of Parliament. And the current Prime Minister ought to be here, he ought to be leading by example. And instead he's chosen to be silent, and he is conspicuous by his absence tonight. And nor has he even ruled out the idea that Mr Johnson could be permitted to stand as a Conservative parliamentary candidate sometime in the future. If there were any shred of seriousness in his pledge to restore accountability and integrity to public life, he should unambiguously endorse the Privileges Committee report tonight and urge his fellow party members to do the same.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way. Would she agree with me that with the Prime Minister not attending and failing to vote, he's endorsing the conduct? And isn't it the time where we depart from this principle of dishonesty being baked into the offer being made by Boris Johnson originally? Because that's what got us into this mess in the first place, that was deemed to be acceptable in return for electoral advantage.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I agree entirely with the points that he makes. And indeed, I think that by not speaking out tonight, the Prime Minister is guilty of collusion, effectively, and that he has really not stood up for the key principles that are at stake, and that he frankly hasn't done his duty tonight. So to conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker, this committee report is a vital part of the fight back against post-truth politics. Truth is not a technicality. As the report states, our democracy depends upon it. And so what is at stake here are our most profound democratic principles and the very concept of decency in public life, leading by example versus hypocrisy, truth versus lies, and respect versus contempt. There can be no failing to turn up or sitting on the sidelines. The choice is either being prepared to stand up and defend democracy or being prepared to turn a blind eye to it being under attack. This is much bigger than one rogue Prime Minister, and I think all of us will be rightly judged tonight on what we choose to do.
Samantha Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Every time another news story breaks about the conduct of the former Prime Minister during the pandemic, I'm reminded of the quote attributed to Sir Douglas Bader. Rules are for the guidance of wise men and the obedience of fools. I've never agreed with that sentiment, and I certainly don't now, because while our constituents followed the rules, while frontline workers risked their lives, and while people lost their lives to the deadly virus, the former Prime Minister misled this House and our constituents and took us all for fools. I echo the thanks expressed by honourable members across the House to the members of the committee who have worked diligently to bring us this report, often under the most difficult circumstances, and it couldn't be clearer. People feel angry, betrayed and let down. I could stand here all day and talk about the anger and injustice felt by so many people. Last week, I met the landlord of a pub in the heart of my constituency. Like so many other businesses in Chester, he closed up shop as soon as the former Prime Minister instructed him to do so. He observed all the lockdown rules and guidance, and like thousands of other small businesses, the price paid was a heavy one. Some are still feeling the impact to this day. Chester Zoo fought tooth and nail to keep going and keep caring for the thousands of animals, plants, and the mission of preventing extinction, with no money coming in. They thought Number 10 were working hard to help them out. They're now disappointed and saddened at what the committee has discovered that was actually going on. And finally, two of my constituents, who I met at the Service of Remembrance at the COVID Memorial Wall just across Westminster Bridge. They stood in tears, remembering their late parents who died within 24 hours of each other during the pandemic. They pointed at the Houses of Parliament and said, "We will never forget and we will never forgive." As this report spells out, if the Prime Minister can't be trusted to tell the truth, then Parliament can't do what it should do. The public's confidence in democracy has been undermined, and the public want him to be held accountable for undermining our democracy. On behalf of my constituents and everyone who did follow the rules, I will be voting for this motion, and the government, including our current Prime Minister, should follow precedent, approve the report and endorse the sanctions in full.
Wishart. Thank you ever so much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Boris Johnson is a liar.
Yep.
Now, you would have been unthinkable to have said this in this House only a few short months ago. Boris Johnson is a liar. There's something still fundamentally, profoundly shocking about saying this in this hallowed setting of our House of Commons, this institution that we revere so much. But there is no other way to put it. Boris Johnson lied to this House. Now, we were saying that long before that concept became fashionable. The SNP even held a debate on this very issue several months ago to highlight that point and to ensure that this was heard loud and clear in this chamber. My right honourable friend, the member for Roskillie and Lochaber, was grandly marched out of this place for asserting something that is now a profound truth, as was the honourable member for Brent East. And she is absolutely right. A retrospective apology should now go to both of these members for getting it absolutely right. This is a stain on their parliamentary record, the fact that they were asked to leave this place for saying something that we now know to be a conventional truth.
Hear, hear.
We were also one of the first to bring up the issues about those parties. We wanted to ensure that this House understood clearly what was going on, that we had a Prime Minister that was happy to have after-drinks parties for his staff in a number of locations in Number 10, when he had overseen the introduction of legislation that everybody else in this country diligently followed. Constituents of ours missed christenings, they missed weddings. For goodness sake, they missed funerals while watching newspaper photos of that Prime Minister standing there with glasses of wine in his hand. We said that his cavalier attitude towards interpreting the rules that he set himself made him unfit for public office. We knew that a reckoning would be coming and that eventually his reign of chaos would come to its inevitable and disastrous end. And everything in this report, Mr Deputy Speaker, vindicates us utterly and absolutely for everything that we have been saying for something like 15 and 16 months. We even predicted his response to this report, his refusal to take responsibility, lashing out at others who correctly judged him, attempting to undermine others who adjudicated in this process, trying to divert attention and obfuscate. Where this report is bad enough, and it is awful, his behaviour since has just compounded absolutely everything we thought we knew about him. It's hard to believe that there has been anyone so ill-equipped for high office or so ill-disposed to lead a country. A man-child playing politics, inventing this bizarre persona to sustain him through the day, creating the smokescreen to divert attention from his real political essence. His inevitable defenestration and removal from public life could almost be scripted. But not for Boris Johnson, a casual and easy departing into the night. But it's the screaming and shouting of someone who just cannot depart the scene. Not for him, the hanging around to accept his punishment and the verdict of his peers. He is such a coward when it came to this issue that he quickly resigned his seat where we beyond the clutches of this Parliament. Yeah. But almost unbelievably, there's some who still hanker this notion, this fantasy, that he will have some sort of route back to elected politics. It's hard to imagine a situation, a setting, where that would be allowed in this House. I think we can conclude today that he is toast, and thank good he is gone. But it has to come back to the party opposite and some of the responses of honourable gentlemen and ladies about Boris Johnson, because they knew everything about him. He is a serial sackee. There's very few places that he has worked that he was never sacked from, but they made him Prime Minister. Now, I made my maiden speech the same day as Boris Johnson. I actually followed him from these benches the day he made his maiden speech. Even at that point, there was doubts about his character, his ability to even just be a Member of Parliament. But not for them. They went on to make him Prime Minister. They celebrated him. They cheered him on through his bizarre and boorish speeches. They have credited him with the 2019 victory, and they have made sure that it's him that delivered the disaster that is Brexit. Something that my constituents, as well as constituents right around this country, is still paying for. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, we're still in the end period of the Johnsonian era, and regardless of how much they want to move on, they will never be able to move on from him until they actually take decisive action to cleanse their party from the stain of Johnson, something that I've not seen them be prepared to do. They've got an opportunity tonight. There's going to be a vote now. There's going to be a vote. So here's the challenge to every single member of the Conservative Party this evening. Line up with us and make sure that we back this Privileged Committee report and ensure that we have a decisive outcome in this House where every member has the opportunity to express their opinion. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we don't share this reverence that this House has by honourable members on both sides of this House. We want to leave this place. We don't share this institutional value that people get dewy-eyed about the House of Commons. But there's something that we do believe in. That is democracy. That is truth. That is doing the right things. These are the fundamental values of politics that determine the actions of everybody in here. Failure to live up to that should have a consequence that we should be taking forward just now. I don't think the privilege report went far enough. I would have had him banned and excluded from ever getting back into elected politics today. But I welcome what they have done, the thorough job that they've exercised and undertaken on behalf of everybody in the House. I now say to everybody in the House, back us this evening. Let's speak with one voice, everybody trooping through this lobby. No return for Johnson. Let's pledge that loud and clear.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This Friday marks my first anniversary, Mr Speaker, of being elected to this House, but this is perhaps one of the most powerful moments I've experienced. A chance for us all to begin to reset trust in our politics. And can I just put on record, Mr Deputy Speaker, my thanks to the Leader of the House and the Shadow Leader of the House, who have sat and listened to each and every word of this debate, and I know that doesn't always happen. So this time last year, I was still pounding the pavements of the Wakefield by-election. And yes, they wanted a fresh start in Wakefield, but they also wanted Boris Johnson out of office because they didn't trust him. They felt betrayed by him and the wider Conservative Party. They knew that he'd been to those parties while their loved ones had lay dying in hospitals and care homes. I've heard too many heartbreaking stories about that last phone call, that last text message with their mum, husband or sister. People still roar with grief and anger. Their stories and their sheer pain in their eyes will stay with me forever. I'm afraid it isn't a surprise to most of the country that this report is so damning, deliberately misleading the House and the Privileges Committee of various very serious conclusions to reach. And it wasn't just a one-off. This report clearly evidences a concerning pattern of behaviour. The committee's findings are damning, but it's nothing that the people of Wakefield hadn't already concluded a year ago when they told the Tories decisively enough is enough. So to those on the benches opposite who are here today to defend the indefensible, it's worth reflecting on what the public think. A YouGov poll last week seemed to chime very closely with what I've heard speaking to people in Wakefield. 69% of those surveyed think Mr Johnson knowingly misled Parliament. We must draw a line in the sand. I'll be voting in favour of the Privileges Committee report today and thank the committee for their diligent work, in spite of the abuse that were levelled at them, including, sadly but not surprisingly, the former Prime Minister. Today I will vote for all those who shared their stories with me, who bared their scarred souls with me, to all those who sacrificed so much, to those who followed the rules, to my former NHS colleagues and other key workers. Today I will vote to take a stand in support of the fundamental principles of public life, for our democracy and truth. In Yorkshire, we call a spade a spade. So let me say this clearly and unambiguously. Boris Johnson is a liar. He will never be forgiven. And those who still seek to defend him today and those intending to hide from their moral duty in the forthcoming vote, your actions or your failure to act will never be forgiven or forgotten. Today we recognise that the former Prime Minister knowingly misled the British people and Parliament, and we finally, I hope, close this damaging Trumpian chapter in our Parliament's history. Mr Deputy Speaker, Mr Speaker, where is our Prime Minister, Mr Speaker? With his integrity, with his professionalism and with his accountability. I say to our Prime Minister, grow a backbone and finally stand up to Mr Johnson. It's wrong that taxpayers' hard-earned money is being used to fund Boris Johnson's ongoing lies. Given the findings of the committee, the government must demand Boris Johnson pays back every single penny. Mr Speaker, I'll finish with this. The public are watching.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start off by thanking the Privileges Committee and a thoroughly decent, honest, fair and strong report based on the evidence. And it was crystal clear in its findings that the former Prime Minister, Johnson, misled this Parliament, misled the House, MPs, misled the people, and he misled our great nations. Put it bluntly, he lied. Serial liar, almost on an industrial scale. Of course, he lied to nurses, doctors, care workers, bus drivers, train drivers, ambulance workers, firefighters. Everybody were putting their lives at risk in the pandemic to save lives. Remember that mantra? He repeated it enough, didn't he? Every evening. And this all matters because people sacrifice so much in this very chamber and well beyond. And they deserve prime ministers, ministers, politicians, MPs who value the truth and honour, which people have spoke about in this place. Lead by example. The law makers shouldn't be the law breakers. And that's a fact. That Prime Minister broke the law. That's a fact. So I find it intriguing, fascinating, listening to some, and I will say a minority of contributions from that side that try to defend the undefendable. And I thank those honourable members, the right honourable members, right across the House, and I'll say the Conservative side as well, with some incredible experience in this place, for doing the right thing by this Parliament and this democracy. The former Prime Minister, Johnson, has showed nothing but contempt to the friends and the families of the 227,000 people who lost their lives to COVID. And Mr. Speaker, many of us saw the video clips over the weekend of some Conservative Party staff partying while people couldn't say the last goodbyes to loved ones, visit them as they were drawing the last breath. Nothing but contempt. Absolute disgraceful. And that was a culture driven from the top. One rule for them and another rule for everybody else. Unacceptable. Many constituents have been in touch with me, like they have in terms of members right across this House, particularly over the weekend. That was a stark reminder. And then we see that dishonourable, I think the shadow leader of the House spoke about, dishonourable honours list. Every one of those should be withdrawn. And if that doesn't happen, and if the current Prime Minister, which again I think is quite disgraceful that the current Prime Minister is not here today, if he doesn't intervene, maybe some of those people that have received those peerages and those honours could finally do the honourable thing and return them. Say, no, we don't accept these on behalf of those that passed away, on behalf of those families that are still grieving.
Would the honourable gentleman let me just...
I will happily give way.
He's making a very good speech, but I would move to say that during the pandemic, I worked, and many of us worked cross-party in our constituencies, meeting every week with public health and all the people involved in fighting COVID, finding out where we were getting less take-up in vaccinations and so on. There was, I think we should remember this, a lot of cross-party activity in constituencies up and down the country. This is why so many people feel let down by what happened at the top.
Absolutely. And again, thank honourable members right across the House for showing that leadership, including my good self with volunteers in the patch. But what I do ask, again I was referring to the current Prime Minister, is actually, where is the leadership? Where is that sign of strength to rise up and do the right thing? And this is the right time to do that. Yet once again, this current Prime Minister, in the face of the former Prime Minister, Johnson, is shown to be weak, weak, weak. Can't escape that. Can't escape that. That's the truth. Today is a chance for Parliament to assert its authority and uphold the standards that we expect, our constituents expect, of parliamentarians. Look, my late mother always spoke about telling the truth. The truth shall set thee free. And that's something, a principle that's enshrined into Parliament. Honour. Honourable members, right honourable members. It's something that escaped that former Prime Minister, Johnson. And now the facts have been borne out via this report. So, together with everybody, most people, most honourable and right honourable people across this House tonight, I will be voting for the motion, voting to uphold the truth and parliamentary democracy, and we'll also be showing what needs to happen to bullies. Those bullies that have tried to intimidate members of that Privileges Committee, whether it be the chair who's done a sterling job, or whether that be Conservative members, the 4 Conservative members who have stood up to incredible intimidation, incredible abuse. Look, let's send a message to those bullies. And I can see one of the committee members over there, 2 of the committee members over there. Thank you for all you've done, and I hope that people join us right across the House and do the right thing. Thank you.
Martin Dockett to use.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spent some time with my dad. My dad's about to enter his 90th year. But there were too many people across Clydebank, Dumbarton and Vale of Leven who didn't get time to spend with their dad yesterday. And I'm sure there will be many people in this House who took that opportunity and who have constituents whose fathers aren't around because of COVID-19, whose mothers aren't around because of COVID-19, their brothers, their sisters. How many disabled people were locked in their homes because they listened to what the government had to say? My nephew, in a wheelchair in his own home, unable to go out because of COVID-19, and a British Prime Minister who told him what to do but who broke the rules himself. Yeah. My sister, a constituent, sitting in her own room, a kidney transplant patient, unable to go about the house with the rest of her family, just like other constituents across Clydebank, Dumbarton and the Vale of Leven. This is personal. It's personal for every constituent that I represent, and I'm sure it's personal for every other constituent that members in this House represent. But I'm afraid the House has to take a lesson. Because while I commend the report and all the members of the committee, and I commend the chair and all the clerks who helped in it, it doesn't answer some fundamental questions that the House will need to consider in the long term. How is it possible that Boris Johnson walks out the door and earns millions within days, and all we can say to him, and I will quote from the report, in the view of the fact that Mr Johnson is no longer a member, we recommend that he should not be granted a former member's pass. How ridiculous we look, but yet the committee itself is hamstrung by the very regulations of this place. This report is not a panacea for democratic practice in the Houses of Commons for the British state. This is not an answer, but it does give evidence to the former member of Uxbridge who lied through their teeth, who partied on while our constituents were dying, and while working class communities the length and breadth of these islands, as I think the honourable member for Weavervale was talking about earlier, people driving ambulances, paramedics, orderlies in hospitals who couldn't get PPE, even though we see them being dumped in fields in the shires of England in the last couple of days. How ridiculous that communities like mine had to suffer the indignity of that buffoon sitting in Downing Street while our families were dying. How ridiculous. The report, well, it gives evidence, it takes the evidence. And do those members who were opposite who said they saw no evidence? Well, guess what? Here's the evidence. It's in the report. They might as well read it for a change. Now, there was also the COVID inquiry is ongoing, Mr Speaker. And let me quote the other... Yeah, I will give way to my honourable friend for Glasgow East.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. And doesn't it make a bit of a mockery that one of the things that the report can recommend is that Boris Johnson does not have a former member's pass, but he still has the privilege of sitting as a member of the Privy Council and representing this country at the Cenotaph? Shouldn't we be looking at trying to strip him of these things as well?
I'll come on to honours in a minute, because I do believe, Mr Speaker, I may have a wee bit of time. Let's quote the other former Prime Minister, David Cameron, who at the COVID inquiry today said, "From my experience chairing Cobras, the system works, but the system works better when the Prime Minister is in the chair. The party opposite removed the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, who I have every confidence, while we may disagree, I have every confidence that the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead would have been at every Cobra meeting during COVID-19, unlike the person they replaced her with." That's the ridiculous proposition that David Cameron came up to today. He agrees that that idiot, if that's not parliamentary, I'll retract it, but I think it is, that idiot missed 5 COVID-19 Cobra meetings. People were dying. It's the greatest tragedy since the Blitz, and he couldn't be bothered to turn up. My constituents turned up. They had to go to work. They drove ambulances. They were in working in porters and hospitals. And what do they get told? And I'll quote it again, that he gets his pass taken off him. Now, that actually sounds quite pathetic, but that's the limitations that we have been given to us in this report. It's the limitations placed on the Privileges Committee itself. Now, back in the 9th of December 2021, I then asked the Paymaster General, because we'd heard about parties in 2020, Mr Speaker. You might remember that, Christmas parties. Now, I asked the then Paymaster General in relation to those Christmas parties that if something looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it's at a Christmas party, it's usually a duck. It seems the duck was also a liar, and that liar said that those parties never took place. Now, on the issue that my honourable friend for Glasgow East talks about in relation to the rights and privileges of the former member for Uxbridge now that they've left, don't give him a damn thing. Don't allow a single honour to go through that he has sought the monarch's approval for. Now, I'm no monarchist, but I do believe that the monarch has the ability, the head of state has the ability, or the advisers to the monarchy have the ability to say that an honour, the person is not befitting the honour. That whole goddamn list is not befitting any honour, Mr Speaker. Every single one of them should be withdrawn. But that then comes back to the whole crux about the limitations on the House. Because we're giving out honours left, right and centre to people who sit as legislators who broke the law. The report expunges them. They're lawbreakers, but we, through privilege, are allowing them to sit in the other place. We are forcing the head of state, the monarch, through in practice, to make sure that they go into there, to dictate law to us and our constituents. What a laughing stock, an absolute laughing stock. Now, just finally, Mr Speaker, there is this issue about those who see this as some kind of panacea that the House of Commons, this mother of parliaments, will move forward. Democracy is imperfect. And it was a member, I think, for Brighton Pavilion, who I believe was the first member to talk about the issue of truth in our politics and how far this goes back. Because this report, I'm afraid, will not answer why Boris Johnson came about. It won't answer the dark money that funded his campaign for Brexit. It won't answer the issues around Scottish limited partnerships, which so many members will know about, which funnels money that we have talked about consistently, which the government does nothing about, because that's why this report exists. We've allowed it to happen. I hope to God, Mr Speaker, and I'm a doubting Thomas when it comes to that, I'm an imperfect Christian, that members on all sides will go through the lobbies tonight to actually support the report with all its limitations, doesn't answer the questions that my constituents want as to why Boris Johnson's not at that bar being held in contempt as a stranger. Now, some people may say that's a bit of an arcane process, but he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The first time a Prime Minister has been held in contempt of the House. And this is all we have got to say to it. How ridiculous this place must seem to our constituents. How ridiculous to the people of Clydebank, Dumbarton and the Vale that this ex-Prime Minister swans off and they are living in the traumas of the modern age. What an absolute parcel of rogues in a nation.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is not really my duty to close this debate, but with the kind permission of the Chair and the Honourable Lady opposite, there were three things I did want to briefly say. The first is, and many members have said it, to thank again the Privileges Committee for the work they have done. It is a task that we gave them to do, and they have carried it out in very difficult circumstances. And I give way to my honourable friend on that point.
I'm grateful for the leader giving way.
Sir Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the leader for giving way. Would she agree that whatever view one takes on this matter, whatever side one is, the House unanimously set up the Privileges Committee, all 7 members of them. They worked for months diligently to produce this report. They've come under huge criticism, abuse, so much so that they've had to have extra security for the reputation of this House, to preserve the reputation of this House. And this House, therefore, owes them a huge debt of gratitude.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend. I think he makes that point very well. Secondly, I would like to acknowledge the tributes that some colleagues have paid to their friend and former colleague. As my right honourable friend, the right honourable member for Maidenhead, said, for many members, this is a sad and difficult duty. And finally, can I thank all right honourable and honourable members who have taken part in the debate today. This is an important matter. As I have said, members should make up their own minds and follow their conscience. They may agree or disagree with the report, or they may agree and disagree with the report and different aspects of it, as some members have. They should do what they think is right. They should be left alone to make up their own minds. They should be left alone to vote, and having cast their vote or not, they should be left alone afterwards. And I hope that is something that all members of this House can agree upon.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No, 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 no.
Division, clear the lobbies. The question is, as on the order paper, does many of that opinion say aye?
Aye.
The contrary, no.
No.
The tellers for the ayes, Liz Twist. Please don't test my patience. Right. The tellers for the ayes, Liz Twist and Colleen Fetchers. For no, Alan Campbell and Lillian Greenwood. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 354. The noes to the left, 7.
Who are you? Who are you?
The ayes to the right, 354. The noes to the left, 7. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Allah! We now come to the motions 3, 4 before us. Bill Wigan to move. So, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that this House now adjourn. As many that opinion say aye. Aye. We now come to, I'm just going to let the room clear before I come to Helen.